it would be the last time he would see the light of day. But knowing that his God was never too far, he started singing through the pain and watched as those chains fell right off, set free in Jesus' name. Well, the jailer woke up to a great earthquake like he'd never seen before, fearing that all of his prisoners had fled. He prepared to die by the sword, but Paul cried, "We're here and there's no need to fear." That voice he didn't ignore. The jailer fell to his knees, the Savior to me, proclaiming the Lord of Lords. Well, believing, it doesn't just come when you see him. Your view can only go so far. I know it, I've tried and can testify. When you walk by your faith, not relying on sight, you'll find you can conquer through God's power and might. Well, believing, that's what comes from believing. When
Well, good evening, everyone. I hope that you are doing well tonight. Welcome to our stream as we are opening up the scripture and looking together at Revelation chapter 11. We're talking tonight about the two witnesses of Revelation 11. We'll be looking at some Old Testament background. We'll be looking at some of the germane sections of the New Testament. We are going to be kind of trying to think for the first time about some of the chronology of Revelation that we've dealt with very lightly up to this point. And I think for good reason. I think that this is the natural place, to start to pick that up. So, got a lot to do tonight, and I am looking forward to it. I hope that you are too. Good to see you, Sister Shirley and Brother Durwood, Sister Teddy, Brother James, Sister Brenda, Sister Susan. Glad to have all of you on here with us. First off, whatever prayer requests you have tonight, please let me know. I want to remind you to continue praying for Sister Betty Montague and Brother Tom as she continues to struggle with health issues. Just pray for them this week. Be in prayer for Brother Jeff Teague's family. His father passed away today, so be in prayer for him as well. Be in prayer for the families, of course, of those affected by this shooting in Colorado. I spoke to a missionary there, Brother Everett Ledbetter. He's a friend of mine that is sent out by a church in West Monroe, Louisiana. I texted him to make sure he was okay because it was only about 10 minutes away from their field of labor, and I'm grateful that he and his family were fine. But of course, with that, and then with the shooting a couple weeks ago that has been in the news, certainly a lot of grief, a lot of wickedness in our world right now. And so we definitely want to be in prayer for those that have been affected by that, and for our nation and our leaders as well. I wonder what other prayer requests you all have tonight. I know Sister Mary Fox has some ongoing unspoken ones. Susan had those tests this week, so be in prayer for results from that to be good. That is all that immediately comes to mind for me. Brother Jim Talley, Sister Michelle Bryant's father, is, you remember a couple weeks ago we'd been praying for him, a feeding tube that he'd accidentally pulled out and had to have that surgically put back in. He's got an infection now where they may have to amputate one of his toes, and so I know that I know they would cover your prayers for him as well. What other prayer requests do you all have tonight? Just go ahead and share those in the comments. In terms of announcements, this week we will finish 1 Peter, and then next week is Easter, if you can believe that. We're not having the breakfast or a sunrise service, because there just wouldn't be anything to do in between the sunrise service and the main worship service. But we are going to have our regular, we'll have the egg hunt for the kids at 9:30, and then have our worship service at 10:15. And so look forward to that. Really expecting to have a good time with that, and hopefully maybe some people that haven't been able to be in church for a while now have been able to be vaccinated, and maybe they'll be able to join with us on Sunday. Let's see, the next Sunday, with Easter. So I made a Facebook event. If you get a chance to click that and invite some people, click that you're going. Don't click interested. That's weak. You're not interested. You're going. You're going to be here. And then share it. Invite some of your friends that might want to come and bring their kids as well. Morning worship will start at regular time, but the putting that in the comments now, so you can click that event if you haven't already. Click once that you're interested, and then click again that you're going, and then click invite and say, hey, I'd love for you to come to worship with me this week. I think we're going to have a fantastic time, and I've had a good response already. We've got 22 people that have clicked an interest in it, and so I think that we'll just keep on rolling. All right, what else do I know? We do need eggs for Easter. Candy, not eggs. We've got plenty of eggs. We do need candy for Easter, so if you'd like to bring some of that, our teens will be getting together the Saturday before to gather their Easter eggs, to stuff the Easter eggs. One thing which I haven't said, haven't promoted this year, but many of you are already on it, is that next week I'll start with that Easter daily list on Flock Notes and send out 3 or 4 texts a day throughout the week leading up to Easter, kind of trying to give you a real-time idea of what Jesus would have been experiencing in his week leading from the triumphal entry up to the resurrection. And so just be aware of that. If you're not on there, you can go to flocknote.com/AlvinNBC, log in with your phone number, and sign up for Easter Daily. I don't know. Once you're logged in, I think it's fairly easy to add yourself to groups. So be aware of that too. Sister Brenda says, be in prayer for our expecting moms. Absolutely. Please do that. Sister Margaret, hello. Hope. Let's see. I really feel like I knew something else. If you missed the Ask the Pastors that we did last night, if you go to facebook.com/askpastors, whether you have a Facebook or not, you can watch those videos. Or Ask the Pastors, I guess. No, Ask the Pastors is somebody else. Ask Pastors is us. We had a great discussion about sanctification and about balancing out different things, different competing priorities in our lives that I think would be helpful for you as well. So that was a good conversation with a couple people that I think will be good for you. Okay. I think that may be it. In terms of announcements, I don't see any other prayer requests that any of you have submitted, but if you come up with some as we are rolling along, then feel free to share those, and we'll look at them as we go and deal with them together. But let's go ahead and get started with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father God, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your mercy and your love. I thank you as we think about those that are grieving and those that are facing great challenges, that death is defeated because Christ is King. I thank you for the good news of the resurrection of Christ that we celebrate this time of year. And I thank you for the opportunities to share the gospel that this provides. Father, as we open up your word tonight, I pray that you'd give us wisdom, that you'd give us clarity, that you'd give us insight, and that above all, that you would make us more like your Son, Jesus, in whose name I pray. Amen. All right, beloved. Revelation chapter 10 is where we are going to be looking tonight. And we're going to look at it, kind of draws our attention to some main points in it, some of the main symbols, and then we will try to frame it together the best that we can. And of course, I said Revelation 10, and I think I even wrote Revelation 10 in the video description, but the two witnesses are in Revelation 11. Whoops. Forgive me, please. Sometimes I just freeze up on things like that. My brain just gets out of whack. Revelation 11. Let me remind you just of this. He'd received the book, and it was sweet as honey in his mouth, but bitter in his belly. And then Jesus, I think, said to him, "You must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings." Revelation 11 then says, "And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise, and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees, and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, excuse me, if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he may be killed. These have the power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them, and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these 2 prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. And after 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000. And the remnant were affrighted, and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe was past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. Well, I think there's several things that are really interesting here right off. One, you notice this, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. Doesn't this seem out of place? Because if we scroll back up, or flip back in your paper Bible, when we went way back, we saw that the 5th angel sounded his trumpet, and it said, 1 woe is past, and behold, there comes 2 woes more hereafter. So the first woe is the 5th trumpet. Now, if I scroll down a little bit more, past our text tonight, we get to the 7th angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven. And if I keep going, you see all these events that happen here, and these then, the reaction here, become the third woe. And so the 5th trumpet is the 5th woe. The 6th trumpet is the 6th woe. The 5th trumpet is the first woe. The 6th trumpet is the second woe, and then the 7th trumpet is the third woe. But what's strange about this is that we really seem to have moved on from the 6th trumpet, don't we? The 6th trumpet sounded way back in chapter 9. Okay? These are the ones where you had the demons who came that were led by this creature from the pit who had the pit was the 5th one, the scorpions coming out. But here you have the 4 angels that were bound at the Euphrates that were loosed, that slay a third part of mankind, and the number of the army of the horsemen come out. You had all these demons come, and then the people didn't repent. That certainly seems to be kind of a conclusion. But then we have this moment with the book that John is given, the 7 secret thunders. And then we have the introduction to the 2 witnesses. And then at the end of it, it says, behold, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. And so what's interesting about verse 14 to me is that it seems to be out of place. And the very fact that it seems to be out of place ought to slow us down and make us say, okay, what is John trying to do by holding this whole section together? What is John doing by knitting the 2 witnesses and the scroll and the 7 thunders with this second woe consumed in the 6th trumpet? What's going on with all of this? Well, I think those are good questions for us to ask. That's why I ask them. Maybe it'll be helpful now to jump in back to the beginning and start to try to frame this out. It says, there was given unto me a reed like unto a rod. Now this ought to sound familiar to you. If you have a Bible that has cross-references in it, almost certainly this is one of the ones that they get. Okay, that not every Bible gets everything that I would think is a cross-reference, but this one would be hard to miss. And so if you kind of pulled this up, and the cross-references here, then we have Ezekiel 40 in Zechariah 2. I'm going to open up Ezekiel 40 first. Let's see what's going on in Ezekiel chapter 40. In the 25th year of our captivity, in the beginning of the year, in the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after that the city was smitten, in the selfsame day the hand of the Lord was upon me, and brought me thither. In the visions of God brought he me into the land of Israel, and set me upon a very high mountain, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. And he brought me thither, and behold, there was a man, whose appearance was like the appearance of brass, with a line of flax in his hand, and a measuring reed. And he stood in the gate. And the man said unto me, Son of man, behold with thine eyes, and hear with thine ears, and set thine heart upon all that I shall show thee. For to the intent that I might show them unto thee art thou brought hither. Declare all that thou seest to the house of Israel. So he's brought to this man who has a measuring stick, and he says to him, okay, Ezekiel, this is why you've been brought here. You've been brought here to watch what I'm going to show you, and then to preach it to the Israelites. And behold, a wall on the outside of the house round about, and in the man's hand a measuring reed of 6 cubits long by the cubit, and a handbreadth. So he measured the breadth of the building, 1 reed, and the height 1 reed. There's a measuring stick that's 6 cubits. Cubit is the distance from your elbow to the tip of your finger. Okay, that's kind of interesting. About 18 inches. So a 1.5 feet is a cubit. So a hand breadth is 4 inches, right? It's the breadth of your hand. And so he's got a stick that is 6 cubits long. Okay, so 6 times a 1.5 feet. And if you did your new math, then you would say, okay, 6 times a half is 3, plus 6 is 9, and a hand breadth. So if you had a 1.5 feet times 6, that's going to be 9 feet 4 inches. You got to imagine this is like a fully extended tape measure. It's a big thing. And he measured the breadth of the building and the height of the building. It is 1 reed tall and 1 reed wide. And so he comes to this house, and it's the dimensions are square. Then came he unto the gate, which looketh toward the east, and went up the stairs thereof, and measured the threshold of the gate, which was 1 reed broad, and the other threshold of the gate, which is 1 reed broad. And every little chamber was 1 reed long and 1 reed broad. And between the little chambers were 5 cubits, and the threshold of the gate by the porch of the gate within was 1 reed. He measured also the porch of the gate within 1 reed. Then measured he the porch of the gate 8 cubits, and the posts thereof 2 cubits, and the porch of the gate was inward. So he's measuring each thing, and you've got all these ones. Then here it's 8 cubits and 2 cubits for the porch. And the little chambers of the gate eastward were 3 on this side and 3 on that side. They 3 were of one measure. And the posts had one measure on this side and on that side. So in Ezekiel's vision, he's got one stick. That's this weird length, right? 9 feet 4 inches. But he has this stick because all of the interior stuff is cubed. It's all the same. And that's the purpose of him getting this unique measuring rod. And he measured the breadth of the entry of the gate 10 cubits, and the length of the gate 13 cubits. So the gate and the porch are different. They're outside. They don't match the same standard. The space also between the little chambers was 1 cubit on this side, and the space was 1 cubit on that side. And the little chambers were 6 cubits on this side and 6 cubits on that side. He measured then the gate from the roof of one little chamber to the roof of another. The breadth was 25 cubits, door against door. He made also posts of 60 cubits, even unto the post of the court round about the gate. And from the face of the gate of the entrance and to the face of the porch of the inner gate were 50 cubits. So you get this building, right? And, I have to read this last little part. There were narrow windows to the little chambers, and to their posts within the gate round about, and likewise to the arches, and windows were round about inward, and upon each post were palm trees. Now, palm trees, a fascinating little thing in the Bible. We've come upon palm trees a lot in the design of the temple and the tabernacle. Okay? You say, why is that? God created the whole world, in a sense, to be a temple. The whole earth would be full of his glory. The idol temples, when they were built, they put an image of the god in the middle of the temple, whether that be a statue of Zeus or a statue of Baal or whatever it may be. When God built the whole universe as his temple, in the sanctuary of his temple, the place where he was with his people, Eden, the Garden of Eden, he placed his image bearer. But his image bearer was not a dead image bearer like the statues, because he was not a dead God. Instead, it's a living image bearer, you and me, because he's a living God. And then he places these people as being responsible for expanding the garden, representing him in the world, tending this garden. Now that was lost. They fell into sin. They were exiled from the garden. They lost this place that would be their home and would be the place of God's presence. God called Israel out, and he instructed them to make a tabernacle. Now, the word tabernacle just means tent. And he instructed them to make a mobile sanctuary covered in black goat skin, this big tent that would be moved with them from Egypt to Canaan. And this mobile sanctuary was to be designed where the high priest's clothes had little pomegranates on it, and there were palm trees engraved on things. Finally, once they'd wandered in the wilderness for a while, and after the period of the judges, and after the kingships of Saul and David, Solomon built a permanent place for God, the temple, rather than the tabernacle. But once again, we see this garden imagery, that you've got palm trees and things in there, because the purpose of it was to be a foretaste, first, it was to be a memory of Eden. It was to be a memory of when people walked with God in the garden. Because now God says, I am with you, I am amongst you. My presence was lost because of your sin in the garden, but now, because of the blood on the Ark of the Covenant, because you've made atonement, because I'm at peace with you, now I am with you once again, Eden restored. Now, in 1 Corinthians 3, Paul says, you are God's building. Y'all, the church. He's speaking to the church at Corinth. He says, you people built together. 1 Peter says the same thing. You're living stones built together into a holy habitation. But he says, you people built together are the building. You are the temple of God. Jesus said that. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there am I in the midst of you. But then he says, you are God's garden. Is he mixing his metaphors? Not exactly, because he's saying, look, the temple was a renewed Eden. He says, you are God's temple, and you are also God's garden. That's the context in which he said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. He treats the church as a plant, as something that God has planted and established. And working in the church is working in God's garden. It's this living Eden. Especially the end of Revelation, we see that the New Jerusalem is a city that comes down out of heaven, that there's one measurement you need for it, because it's the same width and height and breadth. It's 4 square, like the Holy of Holies in the temple and in the tabernacle. It's a cube, like these measurements we see here. But yet, at the same time, when you get this description of the inside of it, on one hand you have streets made of gold and all that, but then there's trees and a river. And so, in the midst of all this, yes, it's a city, yes, it's a sanctuary, but it's also a garden. It's Eden restored. And so now, as he's describing this in Ezekiel 40, he's describing this temple, this millennial temple. And this millennial temple is inscribed with palm trees as a picture of what's going on there. And so God is showing Ezekiel, even in the middle of the exile, he takes Ezekiel in this vision to have him measure to God, this place that ultimately, although they're in exile, ultimately, although they're separated from God, just like they'd been separated from God in the Garden of Eden, now they've been separated from the tabernacle or the temple, that even so, God gives this assurance that the time is coming, that he has already measured it out to precise specifications. There's nothing left to chance. He's already measured it out that he will be restored to fellowship with his people. Now that's really good, I think. Let's look at Zechariah chapter 2. If you kept reading in Ezekiel, you'd see this continued measurement stuff. Zechariah chapter 2, another one of the prophets. He said, I lifted up mine eyes again and looked, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. Then said I, Whither goest thou? And he said unto me, To measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth thereof, and what is the length thereof. And behold, the angel that talked with me went forth, and another angel went out to meet him, and said unto him, Run, speak to this young man, saying, Jerusalem shall be inhabited as towns without walls, for the multitude of men and cattle therein. For I, saith the Lord, will be unto her a wall of fire round about, and will be the glory in the midst of her. Ho, ho, come forth, and flee from the land of the north, saith the Lord. For I have spread you abroad as the 4 winds of the heaven, saith the Lord. Deliver thyself, O Zion, that dwellest with the daughter of Babylon. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, After the glory hath he sent me unto the nations which spoiled you. For he that toucheth you toucheth the apple of his eye. For behold, I will shake mine hand upon them, and they shall be a spoil to their servants, and ye shall know that the Lord of hosts hath sent me. Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for lo, I come, and I will dwell in the midst of thee, saith the Lord. And many nations shall be joined to the Lord in that day, and shall be my people, and I will dwell in the midst of thee, and thou shalt know that the Lord of hosts hath sent me unto thee. And the Lord shall inherit Judah his portion in the Holy Land, and shall choose Jerusalem again. Be silent, O all flesh, before the Lord, for he is raised up out of the holy habitation. Now that is what Zechariah does with this measuring stick. You notice there's no measuring, okay? And if you kept reading, he sets apart Joshua, that's important. And then in Zechariah 4, he talks about this golden, this olive lamps, this olive tree, and this lampstand that we're going to come back to. But as you keep reading, you say, where are we going to get this measurement? You know, what's the size of Jerusalem? And of course, that's not his point at all. He sends this angel, and he tells this angel, okay, you're going to go and you're going to measure Jerusalem. And then he says, but wait, it's going to swell up until it cannot be contained. It will be a city without walls, because God says, I'm going to be your walls. But then God says, I'm going to dwell in the midst of you. I'm going to be in the middle. So you're going to swell up and fill the whole earth, because many nations will be joined unto you, grafted into the olive tree of Israel, as Paul puts it in Romans. So he says, I'm going to be there in the center, and I'm going to be your walls. I'm going to be there at the beginning, and I'm going to be there at the end, the Alpha and Omega. He says, I'm going to be all of it. I'm going to be all in all to you, God says. And so here, in Ezekiel, the measuring line was used to refer to the fact that God had this place that was set aside, that was precisely set aside, revealing, of course, also the real dimensions of this place. And then in Zechariah, though, it was to show its limitlessness. In fact, if we go to Revelation 21:15 now, if you have questions, I'm going to go look at the comments in a second. I'm sorry, I got a little wound up. And that you have this city comes down out of heaven. There came unto me one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. So now, the true Jerusalem, holy Jerusalem, Jerusalem from above, is how Hebrews puts it, comes down out of heaven. But the angel says, I'm going to show you the bride. I'm going to show you the Lamb's wife. And so the city, in that sense, it's like if I said that, if I was talking about Alvin, I may be talking about the people, or I may be talking about the landscape. But they're not really that neatly divided, right? The businesses that are here and the way that the streets are maintained and everything, that all reflects on the people and the priorities of the people. And so you have this city coming down out of heaven, as we'll see the city foursquare, the sanctuary. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. That ultimately, as Christians, our ultimate hope is not just that we go to heaven and earth is gone, but rather that heaven and earth collide. That God says, I bring my presence down to you. It's amazing when you read the Bible how much further it goes than what we often seem to expect. So he says, look, I'm going to show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. So this is where the bride dwells, the church dwells. This is the wife of the Lamb. But she's also, there's this city, and the description of the city is supposed to be a symbolic description of the people who dwell there. Having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal, and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that talked with me had a golden reed. We had a linen cord and a measuring rod before, but now it's golden. It kind of elevates things. And the gate, he came with a golden reed to measure the city and the gates thereof and the wall thereof. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits. Okay. According to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. So he measures it, and it's 144 cubits across. Of course, that's 12 times 12. So it's a cube building, and it's the cube of 12, the number of the tribes of Israel and the number of the apostles multiplied together to show this fullness of it. Of course, 144 cubits, 144 times 1.5, remember once again, you and your fancy new math, 72 plus 144 is what, 216. So it's a big old thing, according to the measure of a man, and that is of the angel. And the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And the foundation of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. Okay, so I don't have time to go much further except this. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Now, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. So we get 144 cubits. He's describing this huge number, right? He's saying you're dealing with something really large. And by saying you're dealing with something really large, he's picking up that same theme from Zechariah, that there's no limits, and the gates are open, and God's there in the midst. And so it's this ultimate hope. It's this hope that even in the millennium, where Ezekiel's describing that there's an expansive temple, but there's a limit to it. But in Zechariah and in Revelation, you see, okay, now everything has come full circle, and now many nations are joined to God. They bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. We're going to talk a whole lot more about this when we get to Revelation 21. So don't get too caught up in the details. What I want you to see is that here in Ezekiel and here in Zechariah and elsewhere in Revelation, that each time we come to this idea of a measuring reed that seems to scope out the space where God's people are dwelling. And we shouldn't be too caught up in is it a building or is it a people? Because what the New Testament tells us is that we are his living temple. That the temple in the Old Testament was a picture of us, in a sense. That we are the living place where God dwells. Living stones. And yet, we also know the temple from Hebrews was a picture of the universe. It is a microcosmos, a microcosm of the universe, because the whole earth should have been full of his glory. And so, in that sense, it's a place again. And so we're really talking about both place and people. It's this idea that really pushes our boundaries. And it shouldn't be too strange to us, because way back in 2 Samuel chapter 7, when God made his covenant with David, God said to David, David, you're not going to build me a house. David wanted to build a temple. God said, I will build you a house. Now, what was the house that God was building David? Not a house of cedar. David already had a house of cedar. He was building him a family. But that family ultimately was the place where God would dwell. And so built into the Davidic covenant, sorry, that was loud. Somebody out there is in a big hurry. Built into the Davidic covenant, the very, very far back, like I said, 2 Samuel 7, is this fuzziness where the place and the people, God doesn't dwell in temples made with human hands. They all kind of blend together. And so we have physical places we come and worship. We've got our chapel, our worship center. But what makes it special, what makes it a sanctuary, are the holy people that are there, the place that when God dwells with us. And so we have these physical places, even the millennium, there's these physical places. And yet, the ultimate sense of it is the people. And so I don't think you can ever really get away from that. And so here, holding those three other passages in your mind, Ezekiel and Zechariah and Revelation 21, in Revelation 11, he says, there was given unto me a reed like a rod, and the angel stood, saying, rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. So you see, he's measuring the temple, he's measuring the altar, and he's measuring those who worship God. Okay? Them that worship therein. Once again, this gives us the idea that we're talking about both place and people. This idea, again, traced the whole way through the Bible, but clearly in Zechariah and Revelation 21, but I think it's present in Ezekiel too. This idea that we are where God dwells, we're his habitation. And so he says, you're going to measure this. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot for 42 months. Now, friends, this is backwards from what we read about in Ezekiel. Okay? What we read in Ezekiel was this description that there would be, in Zechariah, was there'd be no limits. That he says, go measure it, and then he says, no, you're going to fill it up. You're going to fill the world up. In Revelation, you have this massive New Jerusalem comes down, but the nations are streaming in and out of the open gates. But here, at this point in the tribulation, he said, I want you to measure it, and only measure the inside. Because the outside, there's a firm line. The Gentiles are walking all over it. and so I think this is very important, and maybe one thing that will give some clarity to this is to look at the temple once again. I know we've looked at it a number of times, but I want to just look at Herod's temple this time, just for a sense of scale, because I do think that maybe we don't necessarily comprehend just how massive Herod's temple is, or was. Here we go. Okay. You see that? Okay, whoops. I was hoping this would have a... Nope. Sorry, I got rid of it, didn't I? Okay, you see this? This is a model of Herod's temple. I think this is the one that's on display in the Jerusalem Museum. You can see how just huge, right? So here's the temple itself. Here is the holy place and the Holy of Holies, that square portion. So here you can see the courts, and then this is the outer court. So the size of a shopping mall. I mean, it's just absurdly huge. And so when you're thinking about the temple, and when he says measure off this part where my people are, and exclude the outer court, I think that it's important to realize from a scale perspective that the outer court is the vast majority of what we're talking about. I really felt like I had one. Yeah, here you go. Can you see this? I can't hear you. You're going to have to speak up. Let me blow this up for you. So here's a football field. 100 yards by 30 yards, something like that. I don't know. Some football aficionado can tell me. It's got to be 110 yards or something. Anyway, there's end zones and 100 yards and 30 or something yards wide. Here is the sanctuary part of the temple. Okay, the holy place, the women's courtyard. So a football field, you could put 3 football fields or something in just the holy place. So it was big. Do not mistake me as saying that it's not big. But then remember how much bigger the courtyard is that we saw. And when we think about the sheer enormity of this courtyard, and then we remember that there are 3 football fields in this place alone, we really start to get somewhere, don't we? We start to get a sense of the huge, huge scale of the temple. And so I think that's helpful. But I think what is more important, obviously, is this idea that the vast outer portion is locked away, and then the inner portion is what's sealed. Let me show you one more thing, just for the sake of being neat. This is Jerusalem today. So here's the old city part. You can see the walls here. Here's the dome on the rock. So this is the Temple Mount. You don't really have much sense of the scale of that here. And then if I pull this across, there's an artist's representation of the temple. So again, when you think about, I think it's helpful because this is a modern city. Okay? And so when you see a modern city and you drag the size of the temple over it, maybe we can start to get an idea of what's left. So it's showing that although it is certain that God will fulfill his promise, although it is certain that all things will be brought together, although it's certain that eventually the nations will pour in and out, that yet this is looking north, so this direction is north, and so anyway, I don't know if that's more helpful or not. I think the other picture is probably better. But it shows, I think, that John's vision at this point is that things are not good, that God has a limited number of people that are faithful to him, and the rest of the world is given over. But I want you to pay attention to that word given. It is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. It's given to them. That means God's still in control. God has not lost control. And it's given to them for a relatively short period of time, 3.5 years. Now, we come to 3.5 years, and now we've got to figure out, when is this happening, that the holy city is given over to them? Because we've got to figure out, when are the two witnesses prophesying? Are they at the beginning, the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, or the second 3.5 years of the tribulation? I suppose you could hypothetically figure that they could be something else too, like start a year in, and I don't think anybody believes that, but who knows? Sure, probably somebody does. Probably somebody believes anything that you could come up with. And just for the sake of your delicate math constitutions, it says the two witnesses prophesy 1,203 score days, 1,260. Divide that by 42, you get 30 days in a month. So it uses an idealistic month, which makes sense. Our modern calendar with the 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, except the second month alone. Was obviously not in use at the time that John was writing his calendar, or writing his book. So I'm going to give power to my two witnesses. They'll prophesy 1,203 score days. Okay, so this 42 months, where, friends, does that come from? Before I move forward, where's my thing? Anybody have any questions or comments on any of the stuff that we've looked at so far? No, it was a whirlwind. I like this on Wednesday nights because I can use my computer and can pull up maps quickly and easily and cross-reference scriptures and stuff for you. I don't like that I can't see your faces and see if you're lost or if you're following with me, or it'd be nice to be able to interact with you a little bit. Soon and very soon, I guess. Although I've got to figure out how we're going to do something like this in person, where I can still pull things up for you to see and stuff. I don't know. There's lots of things I don't know lately. Not seeing any questions. If I don't see any questions pretty quick, I'm just going to assume that you're with me and that everybody is picking up my direction here. we're going to go to Daniel then. And we're going to have to get a little bit of framework. In Daniel 7:25. Well, I guess I need to go back a little bit further. He says, these great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom, and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I would know of the troth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful. So he says that there's four great kingdoms that take up the world. These major world kingdoms: the Persians, the Assyrians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Then he says there's one more that is different than the others, and so the Greeks and Romans are treated as one. There's one more that's different from the others, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things. So beasts represent nations, and the horns represent kings. So he's got 10 kings. One rises up, defeats 3 others, and he is stronger than his fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and the judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus said he, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. So he says this fourth kingdom will have influence over the whole earth, that he'll be extraordinarily powerful, and he'll crush the earth and break it into pieces, and he will reign, and he will persecute God's people right up until the end, right up until the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So each of these kingdoms, the 4 main kingdoms, reigned for a while, and yet the time is coming when God's saints will reign forever and ever. So you have this beast, the Antichrist, is the one that we are dealing with here. It says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. This is, he's going to come, and he is going to speak great words against God, and he's going to wear out God's people. I know what wear out means, because my dad taught me when I was little. If I got worn out, it was not I'd been misbehaving. The Antichrist does not wear people out, wear out their backsides for misbehaving. He wears them out for being faithful to God. And he will think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. So a time, times, and half a time. 1, 2, 3, and a half. What's 3.5 years, class? 42 months. Now they're getting it. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it until the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. So you have the picture that I think you get pretty clearly here, is that God's people are, for the second half of the tribulation, the second 3.5 years, are under extraordinary persecution, extraordinary torment from the Antichrist. Dad asks, how tall is the Dome of the Rock? It is 69 feet tall. So that's a helpful reference point for our picture that we were looking at a second ago. Gives you an idea, 7-story building, or 6-story building, I guess, probably. Anyway, a big building that gives us this really overwhelming. It dominates the landscape. You see it from a long, long ways off. Now we want to look then and go to Daniel 9:27 now. I'm going to jump forward 2 chapters, and I'll go back just a little bit further. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So from the commandment to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah comes, there will be 69 weeks. Now, remember that he's saying that there's going to be 70 weeks altogether. After 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Okay, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So there's 70 weeks altogether. Remember, God had told the Israelites they were going to go into exile for 70 years. And yet Daniel comes along and Daniel says, yes, they'll return to the land in 70 years. But it would take 70 weeks of years, that is 490 years, of God dealing with the people for him to get rid of the root problems of the exile. So even though Herod's temple was much bigger than Solomon's temple, it was missing something very important. It's what later rabbis called the Shekinah, that is, the glorious presence of God. You remember from 2 Chronicles chapter 10, I think, when Solomon dedicated the temple, that people couldn't go into it because the glory of God shone in there. It was so bright, nobody could walk inside. And so when he did that, we realized that God had come to show up there in a special way. Now in Ezekiel, the presence of God leaves the temple. It goes, waits for a minute on the Mount of Olives, and then disappears. And that glorious presence of God never returned to the temple. The rabbis wrote about it. They had a list of ways that the new temple was inferior to the old temple. And they were waiting on the day when the presence of God would return. Because in one sense, their exile would not be over until God returned to them. So the exile is not just being kicked out of Eden, it's being kicked out of the presence of God. The exile for the Jews was not just being kicked out of Canaan, it was losing the temple. It was losing that access to God's glorious presence. Now, of course, the glory of God did return, but they didn't recognize him. He said, one greater than Solomon is here. Jesus came, the glory of God returned to the temple, and they rejected him. And when they did, of course, the temple was destroyed. The Messiah coming, although they didn't know it, the Messiah coming was the return of the glory. So God says it's going to be 490 years. It's going to be 70 weeks of years. There's 70 years for you to get back to the land, but 70 weeks of years for God to get to the heart of the problem. He says, so you have 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness. He says, so I've got 70 weeks of years to deal with your people, to get rid of sin once and for all, to make reconciliation, to bring in true righteousness forever, to seal up the vision and prophecy, to accomplish everything that's been promised, and to anoint the most holy. So to end your sin, to bring in righteousness, to fulfill all of God's promises, and to bring in the place of perfect worship, to set apart the holiest place. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So if you do that, 69 weeks of years, and you go from the order to rebuild the temple, it takes you to the crucifixion. And then, and the wall shall be built again, the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. He dies, but not for himself. He didn't die for his sins, he died for our sins. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So the Antichrist's people, that prince that will come, would come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. The people who destroyed the city were the Romans. Remember, it was the emperor Vespasian, the general Titus, who would later become emperor, was the one who ordered the destruction of Jerusalem. So there's a link between the Antichrist and Rome. That's interesting. come and destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. He says it's going to wipe everything out, a flood, clean slate. Jesus said there won't be two stones left on top of the other. And he, now it's the prince that shall come, okay? The prince that shall come, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So he'll make a covenant with many, a treaty with many, an agreement with many for 1 week, for 7 years. That's the 70th week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abomination he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. You have the Antichrist rise up, the beast that we read about in chapter 7, who makes an agreement with many for 1 week. Many people believe it's a peace treaty with Israel, a 7-year peace treaty. That's possible. It's interesting. The text doesn't say that, and so I'm sometimes suspicious when people repeat something really authoritatively that is a supposition. Certainly, the covenant with many for 1 week could mean a peace treaty. But there are other things we could come up with that it could mean. And I just say that to say that when we start building interpretations on interpretations on interpretations, we have to be careful, because the higher you build that tower, the less steady it gets. And so what do we know for sure from the text of Daniel? That this king rises up, that he makes an agreement that's supposed to be a 7-year agreement with many. Maybe the many is Israel. Maybe the many is the United Nations. Maybe the many, there's no telling. Maybe the agreement is a peace treaty. Maybe the agreement is him claiming to convert. Maybe the agreement. I mean, we'll talk about this. We talked about it some already, right? A long time ago. I was going to say weeks ago, but a long time ago actually. But when he comes in, he makes this agreement. Midway through, he breaks it, and he stops the sacrifice. He stops the worship, and he sets up the abomination of desolation. And that makes the temple desolate until the very end. Now, what's interesting is that when John measures it here, and he says the outer courts are given over, he measures the temple, and he says this is God's, the sanctuary, the holy place. And what that tells us, I think, is that we're dealing again with this fusion of the symbolic, of the people as being symbolized as God's temple and as the literal temple. So the literal temple worship ceases, and yet spiritually, God's relationship, his communion with his people is unbroken. And this lasts until the very end, until the consummation, when everything comes together. And then while the destruction is poured out upon the desolate. He makes it desolate, and he's desolate. They worshipped vain idols and became vain themselves. Oh, friends, once again, I have had, way too much to say. Okay, Daniel 12, 7 through 12 is also important in this. But what I want to get across to you tonight with the 2 verses of Revelation we've covered is that there was given to me, he's given this rod, that God's people are pushed back, that for a while it seems like the whole world is against them, and in fact, if you were taking a poll, the whole world would be against them. This outer place is given over, the temple itself is made a disgrace, and yet God has given it to them for a specific period of time, for 3.5 years. And here at the end of the 3.5-year period, God will come and make all things right. What I think that seems to indicate is that the 2 witnesses prophesy for the second half of the tribulation. Many people think that they prophesy for the first half of the tribulation. But I think that the giving over, where the holy city is given over, everything's tread underfoot, certainly seems to be a reference to the second half of the tribulation, because that lasts right up until the end. And so if that is the case, then we're going to have to get a, we're going to have to work from there. So we'll talk more about this next week. So Teddy asks a great question. The Jewish calendar is only 335 days. Ours is 365. Does this have a bearing on the time frame? Absolutely it does. And it also should keep us from being too confident in our trying to set specific times. Because the Jews actually had different calendars at different times. They adjusted the length of their month. They would have leap months rather than just leap days, or leap, one day in the year. And so their calendar was actually pretty complex. And so I think that on one hand, it should make us cautious about being overly precise about what's going on, because they use different length of years at different times. And are they using the time that was prominent in Daniel's day, or the length of the year that was prominent in John's day? Or I think there's a lot to that. But I do think that especially when you're trying to count out the 69 weeks of years from from the order to rebuild the temple to the crucifixion of Christ, you have to take into account our solar calendar versus their lunar calendar. Excellent point. Anything else anybody has? Sorry we went a little over again tonight, and like I said, I covered 2 verses. A lot to say. But I hope that starts to help us to place the timeline in the context of the rest of Scripture. All right. Going once. Going twice. Sold. All right, beloved. Well, thank you for your kind attention tonight. I hope that you have learned something. And if I'm going to give you a quick application sermonically, I think that the picture is that God's hope that right now you may feel small, that right now it may seem like everything's going in the wrong direction, but the assurance and the hope that God gives us is better. That no matter how tight things get, no matter how much you seem to be squeezed, God says ultimately the whole earth will be full of his glory. It's not a popularity contest. It's not a majority vote. He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords forever and ever. And I hope that's an encouragement to you this week. And may God bless you, and have just an absolutely fantastic evening. And we will see you on Sunday.